Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Olivia Holas for Boca magazine, and it's time for another coffee break. We are joined today by managing partner Marius Ged and Mark Packo of Ged Lawyers. Welcome, gentlemen. It's so great to see you.
Thank you, Olivia. Good to see you again.
And Mark, I love the fish in the background. Very soothing, I must say. So, but today's topic is personal injury and what one should do when involved in an accident. And I was reading on your website a staggering statistic provided by the CDC that each year 40 million Americans end up in the emergency room due to personal injury. So that is a staggering amount. Marty, explain to us what types of accidents fall under personal injury.
Sure, Olivia. At Ged Lawyers, we are a full-service law firm, and within our bodily injury division, we handle motor vehicle accidents, your traditional car accident cases. We handle really a lot of more significant cases, which are considered wrongful death cases, where someone actually perishes, whether it's in an automobile accident or a boating accident. We handle slip and falls. We handle, being in South Florida, there is a good amount of maritime accidents, which could be cruise-related accidents, jet ski accidents. Mark and I specifically have done a bunch of boating accidents, and I'll let Mark speak about some of those that he's handled. And so, yeah, all those different types of cases relate to personal injury, as well as within the division, we handle mass tort cases, where those are cases where either a drug maker or a product maker, for example, the Monsanto cases recently, where they found out that the chemical was killing people, causing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Other cases like talcum or Johnson & Johnson, those types of the cases that we handle in the firm. And, really glad to have Mark Packo here. He's our leader and our fearless leader in our bodily injury division and our seasoned trial lawyer.
Right. Well, it's so great to meet Mark. Mark, so as Mark just mentioned, you specialize in representing clients who sustain personal injuries or, the loss of a loved one due to negligent behavior from others. From experience, what is the most prevalent cause of personal injury?
Well, certainly it runs the full gamut, because in our modern world with modern conveniences, there's many opportunities. For example, it can be the most common, obviously, is an automobile accident. We see them all the time. You also have occasions with premises liability, slip and falls, where we have negligent security, where people don't secure their properties and bad people then harm their visitors who come onto their property. We have more medical negligence, which arises in the context of medical care, nursing home and nursing home abuse. And again, and products liability, where dangerous defective products harm people. And we handle the full gamut of all those types of cases.
Right. And Marty, what are some of the common injuries that, a lot of your clients, come in and are dealing with?
Sure. The common complaints on a car accident, for example, are a lot of neck and back pain, sometimes shoulder pain, depending on the type of hit or the type of impact from the vehicle. So those are your common types of injuries, but they're sometimes and often missed are what's called brain injuries, traumatic brain injuries, or TBIs. When someone is rear-ended, for example, and they may hit the steering wheel, or they may hit their head on the sidebar of the A-frame of the car, they can sustain traumatic brain injuries. And if a patient doesn't recognize that, or the lawyer doesn't obviously talk to the client about that, sometimes those injuries go missed. Look, we're not doctors, we're lawyers. We play lawyer. We know our job in the case. However, just being around the medical people all the time, you see and you understand the medicine. And quite frankly, you become not experts, but you become pretty familiar with the medicine that goes around these different types of cases.
Right. And Mark, so when you're involved in an accident, what should one do, specifically severe accidents and you're dealing with traumatic injuries? I mean, what are the steps and how important is it to have the right legal representation from the get-go?
Well, certainly the first thing one wants to do when involved in an accident is get appropriate medical care. That's step one, because again, for example, and as Marty was talking about, with traumatic brain injuries, we have a thing called the golden hour. It's also similar to stroke victims. in that when you have an intracranial bleed, and that's in a severe brain injury, that you have a very short period of time during which you must stabilize and address that before permanent harm sets in. And so, again, we rely heavily, obviously, on the first responders for those types of cases to identify it. Some of the things that we look for, or that they look for, is if your pupils are not equal, or you have severe headaches, and even sometimes immediate cognitive dysfunction. It tells you something's wrong. But when we get into the more common brain injury cases, post-concussive disorders, it's interesting that, and again, you have to learn to recognize the signs, but we tend to see the people who identify these types of injuries not being the person who's hurt. It's their family members, because they don't appreciate something's wrong with them, that something's going on. But their family members suddenly see changes in behavior, especially anger, lashing out, and in manners which they don't typically deal with, are all signs that there's something going on. And quite frequently, though, the individual who's got the actual injury doesn't even appreciate what's happening. And again, where you have, and the critical part is having the resources to identify when you have somebody and talking to the family members, for example, seeing if we're seeing those behavioral changes, then getting them appropriate evaluations through neurologists, or in severe cases, neuropsychologists who evaluate cognitive dysfunction, and having the resources as a law firm to say, okay, when we're dealing with a case like this, what is the appropriate type of expert to evaluate what's going on, and then to kind of quantify the loss. And these neuropsychologists in particular are able to go in and say, these are the particular areas of the brain that have been affected. For example, in the frontal lobes, we have speech, and then more towards the middle of the brain is memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and they can actually go in through this battery of 3-day testing and identify the specific areas of deficit within the brain. But as a law firm, what we bring to it is having the resources that once we recognize that this is going on, to then properly evaluate and quantify the loss so that our clients can be properly compensated.
Right. So it's a lot of information, and it's definitely all valuable insight, Mark. So, in terms of the next step, so once you've had the medical evaluation and all that, then as an attorney, what is the next step? Do you file? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, certainly early on in every case, you have to identify whether there's coverages available to compensate people. For example, and identifying total coverage, one of the things that insurance agents typically don't emphasize to people, and this is in the automobile setting where we have the most common accidents, that in Florida, you're not required to carry a dime of bodily injury liability coverage. And there's another coverage out there called uninsured motorist. And when you have that, that means if the other person is driving around in a car that's older, and they're carrying the minimal statutory coverage, that creates a pool of money to compensate you, and you get that through your own policy for the negligence of others. And people overlook it and quite frequently waive it to their peril later on when they're hit by someone who doesn't have the ability to compensate them.
Right. Okay, got it.
And there's something, Olivia, that I think is important, and maybe Mark, you can highlight it as well, because Florida recently changed the law with the 14-day rule, and how you have to present, or basically your case vanishes away.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it's not so much that it vanishes away. The 14-day rule is that if you don't we're a no-fault state. So we have what everybody commonly knows as PIP, or personal injury protection coverage. Even the lowest policy in the state of Florida has PIP. But if you do not treat and seek treatment within 14 days, then you're presumed under our law to say, well, I guess you're not hurt, even though you might be, and you do not enjoy the benefit of the PIP benefits that you paid for in your insurance. So it's critical. And again, it's not just about the insurance and the money. It's about your well-being. The sooner you get evaluated, the sooner you find out what's wrong, and the sooner you get treatment, the better your chances for a full recovery. And so certainly we emphasize to people, if there's any question of an injury, go to an urgent care center, go to an emergency room, be checked out and be sure.
That's such an important and great tip. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Marty, how does someone know that they have a personal injury case? Because accidents happen fast, we blank out, it's just, I think sometimes we go into shock mode. So how in retrospect you say, that might be a personal injury case?
So it's common after an injury or after an accident, excuse me, you don't feel pain. The adrenaline's running, you're nervous, you're excited, you're anxious, all those different emotions and feelings obviously rise up and take over the situation. But what generally happens, and we hear this from clients, is day 2 and day 3 is when they start to feel sore. It's not right away. I mean, obviously if there's a broken bone, right away you're hurt. But on the soft tissue type of cases where it's not open and obvious to the body or to looking at the person, they generally feel it a couple days after the accident. And a lot of times we tell our clients, if they call us right after the accident or shortly thereafter, we always advise them, go to an urgent care, go to a doctor, get checked out, let the appropriate medical people look at you and observe you, tell them what exactly happened. Maybe they'll do range of motion testing. Maybe they'll do diagnostic imaging if necessary. But, again, you got to get checked out by the doctor. That's the key element here. The doctor needs to obviously see you and examine you. And, it's interesting during this COVID time, there was in the beginning, no one was even on the road. So there was no accidents. But as time has gone by and things have loosened up, even the primary doctors and the physicians are now taking patients on telemedicine. So where they had to before go to a doctor's office and do a physical exam in person, they're now able to adapt and make those appointments via telemedicine. So my advice is see a medical professional, go to an urgent care. You don't necessarily have to go to the ER because that's the most expensive place to go. Call your primary, call your urgent care, present to them and tell them everything that happened. Tell them how.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
And then tell them exactly what happened from the beginning of the accident to the end.
I was just going to say, Marty, and then call your attorneys at Ged Lawyers, right?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
For
the medical checkup and everything. So, Mark, there's accidents and car accidents, and it sounds like that's probably the most prevalent, reason for, in being injured. But tell us a bit more about other types of personal injury cases, such as slip and falls and product recalls.
Sure. Well, and again, we'll broaden it out a little more from that. The area of law we're talking about is all based on a Latin word called tort, which translates to wrong. And when you are hurt due to the fault of another, that is when you walk into the area of tort law. It can be anything from, again, where a rear end collision or even a more severe on I-95 type accident. But also for example, when you walk into a grocery store, they owe a duty to you to maintain that property in a reasonably safe condition, which means if you're going through the store and there's liquids on the floor, there's spilled food products on the floor, anything of that nature, and you slip and fall and hurt yourself, that is it. And again, we also see this arise where people, we have a case right now where person went out and rented a Segway and went on a Segway tour. And the Segway, the controller for the speed went haywire on him. And all of a sudden it started accelerating and he couldn't stop it. So as a result, he had to jump off the Segway. He had bad choices at that point. I can ride this thing out and keep going faster and faster, or I get off. So he chose to jump off into the grass next to the roadway, but severely injured his knee. And that's an example of a dangerous and defective product. And then those break down those cases into two main species. One is that it's an as-designed flaw. In other words, every one of the products are all bad. So if you get any of them, we know that it's basically that product is dangerous and defective as it is. Then there's what's called as manufactured, where a particular one didn't meet the manufacturer's standards, but it doesn't make it any less dangerous or defective. Other areas that we see, again, we talked a little about boating accidents. They're similar species to motor vehicle accidents because typically someone's negligent operating the boat, it hits a seawall, it hits another boat, it runs over a scuba diver when they're posting their flag. And I'm born and raised down here. I've been diving my whole life. boaters just don't seem to understand that that red flag with the white stripe through it means don't drive by those people because there's a diver underneath it. But there's those areas. And again, we also run into it in medical negligence where doctors fall below the applicable standard of care and people get harmed. And it can be the full gamut from failing to diagnose a cancer on a timely basis, and people then lose the opportunity to effectively beat the cancer, especially in forms of certain aggressive ones, to injuries that arise, and some of the worst cases of them all are the ones that arise during childbirth. And the children are deprived of oxygen during the birthing process and wind up severely injured and will need lifetime care. They have a normal life expectancy, but their brains are damaged, and they remain effectively 1 to 2 year olds for their whole lives, and they're going to need a lifetime of care. And those are some of the worst cases.
Yeah.
It's always tragic when a child's involved.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving me goosebumps. I mean, just to think of that. But Marty, how long do we have to file a personal injury claim in the state of Florida?
Great question. It depends on what type of claim it is. If it's a negligence claim, we have 4 years pursuant to the statute of limitations. If it's a wrongful death case or a medical negligence case resulting in a death, you have 2 years. So you got to really be particular on the type of case and understand how the case is or who the defendants are and what type of case it is. So those are your statute of limitations, which kind of govern the time limits for you to bring that claim.
Okay, great. Good tips as well. And Mark, what damages are covered in a personal injury claim? I mean, it sounds like it depends what kind of insurance policy you have, but what is the common coverage that you've been finding in, with your experience?
Well, actually, the coverage is simply liability coverage. It doesn't specify particular types of claims. And I'll use, for example, a homeowner's insurance policy. If a homeowner does something in their property and someone was harmed by it and injured, the first areas that we have are what we call blackboardables, or tangible losses. That is medical care in the past, medical care reasonably going to be necessary in the future, lost wages from not being able to work. There's another one called loss of earning capacity, where, especially in the more severe cases, people are not going to be able to return to work at all or at their prior function and earning level. And those can be very significant damages because they go on for the rest of your life. But those are the hard kind of numbers. Then we have mental pain and suffering, loss of capacity for the enjoyment of life, mental anguish. And those are the non-economic type injuries or damages. But they're all covered. A particular insurance policy is going to cover everything. The liability portion doesn't sever or say, I'm only going to cover this part of the damages. All of the damages are covered under these policies because it's just a general liability policy.
Okay. So it's very important to have a very good attorney representing you because, you're able to know exactly what you're able to get as compensation for your client, right? You'd say that, huh?
Well,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that is certainly a very important thing, but there's something else that's even more important, why you need to get to an attorney early and you need to get the right law firm involved. And I'll give you an example that just came up this week. Tragically, there was a group of kids going along Alligator Alley and wound up getting in an accident with a tractor trailer. The vehicle rolled over and one of the children, a 15-year-old, was killed and 2 more were severely injured. Now, in this case, what we do, for example, the highway patrol will go out and do the investigation because they're the ones on the scene. And they do an excellent job, but they don't have some of the resources that we bring to bear. For example, in that case, we're having today a helicopter fly over the area at about 300 feet, taking high-quality digital film, because then you get the bird's eye view of all the skid marks, any physical evidence that's there that you can't see from ground level. And we have the resources to bring to bear and the know-how to then say, we need to preserve this evidence. And because, again, it's especially on a road like Alligator Alley, as heavily traveled as it is, our summers with rain, evidence is gone in a matter of days. That's why you need to get to a qualified attorney and who knows what they're doing early on so they can preserve that evidence because it's gone very quickly. And that to me is the initial push, that you have to have someone who can get in there, gather the evidence. And another example, we in-house, the people who do the traffic homicide investigations for the Highway Patrol, they're trained as traffic homicide investigators. They typically have at least 200 hours of training. Typically, the fully trained ones have about 800 hours of formal training in investigating and reconstructing accidents. We have a retired law enforcement officer in our firm that has all of that same training, which allows us to, when for example, the particular entity may not have done a good job, we can get out there and do a better job and preserve the evidence because it's gone in a big hurry.
Okay. Well, listen, to get on a more upbeat note, this was all so insightful. And basically, let's all be careful when we're out there and try and avoid any type of accident. But, I like to finish off our conversations with something light. So my question this week for the two of you is, which Netflix show are you watching at the moment? Marty?
Me, okay. Currently, I'm watching a few, but I think my favorite one is the new version of Last Chance U.
Okay. And what about you, Mark?
I have not become the Netflix addict during this COVID time. I've been trying to stay the heck away from it. So, maybe I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that, but it's, I'm tending to be more trying to catch up on reading and doing things like that as opposed to sitting in front of the TV. And then, of course, there are my friends back behind me I have to take care of.
Yeah, they've been very calming, I have to say, in the background. So thank you so much for such an informative chat. It's so great to get the chance to chat with Ged Lawyers every week at this time on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Olivia. Great to see you.
Great to
Thank you, everyone. Everyone be safe and be well.
Yep, definitely.
And wear your seatbelts. Buckle up.
That's right. That's a great way to end the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Enjoy your cup of coffee, and we'll see you soon.